The federal courtroom was a cathedral of tension, every marble pillar an echoing footstep, a silent witness to what was about to unfold. Sunlight spilled through the tall arched windows, illuminating a space already electric with expectation. Rows of journalists sat hunched over their notepads, pens hovering. Aides clutched folders tight to their chests. Family members of the gallery whispered in low tones, their voices swallowed by the sheer weight of the air dot. At the center of it all stood Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't moving much, only the slow, deliberate rise and fall of her chest betrayed the storm coiling inside her. When she spoke, her voice was calm, yet there was steel in it. "I bring evidence," she said, each word measured. That forces the president to confront a truth he's spent years hiding. Across the aisle, Donald Trump shifted in his chair, jaw tightening until the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. His eyes narrowed, studying her, the way a cornered predator measures the distance to the nearest exit. Crockett reached for the leather-bound dossier in front of her and, without hesitation, placed it on the bench with a sharp, resonant slap. Papers fanned open, ledgers, timelines, DNA test receipts. None of it was rumor. Every page came from the public record, but assembled like this, it became something else entirely. A weapon. The judge's gavel came down once, hard. The door at the back of the room banged open as security shifted into position. Cameras rolled without blinking. On the outside, the world was already reacting. Notifications lit up screens. Headlines pulsed in red banners. Crockett says Trump owes the country answers. Trump's lips curled. He leaned forward, muttering something too low to hear, but his eyes locked on Crockett like a challenge. She didn't flinch. She only stared back. Somewhere in that charged silence, the question was no longer whether the truth existed, but how far, and how fast it was about to spread. Asterisk, the court clerk shuffled forward with an armful of binders, their spines marked with neat black labels, minus 1994, 1995, 1996. Dates that, to most, would seem like ancient history. To Jasmine Crockett, they were a map leading to the moment she now stood in. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she opened the first binder and let the pages breathe. Receipts, travel itineraries, bank transfers. Every sheet a puzzle piece. In what she called the hidden timeline. The courtroom listened to the rustle of paper like it was the turning of some forbidden book. She lifted her gaze to the judge. "These documents," she said, her voice steady but resonant, "come directly from public filings, subpoenaed financial records, and publicly reported travel logs." She paused, letting the words hang. When arranged chronologically, they tell a story the American people were never meant to see. Trump leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest, but his foot tapped against the floor in a quick staccato rhythm. He cut in, his voice sharp. "This is nothing but political. Theater. Fake news in a courtroom. You people will stop at nothing." Crockett didn't blink. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Trump. This is theater. But the script was written by your own actions, and I'm just reading it aloud." The judge's brow furrowed, eyes scanning the ledger pages before him. A whisper passed through the gallery, yet another, like wind through dry leaves. Reporters scribbled frantically, already shaping tomorrow's lead. On the screen behind Crockett, a projector flickered to life. Images, grainy photos of Trump, stepping off private jets, meeting behind closed doors. Timelines that matched too closely to dismiss, formed a mosaic of proximity, opportunity, and secrecy. Somewhere near the back, a woman in a dark coat crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. Crockett's eyes found her for the briefest moment before turning back to the bench. "This," Crockett said, tapping the timeline projected in red, "is where the truth begins." Asterisk, the hum of the projector filled the silence like a distant storm. One by one, the images on the screen sharpened into moments frozen in time. Photographs from decades past, sworn statements filed in dusty county archives, and fragments of interviews pulled from long-forgotten news segments. Jasmine Crockett stepped closer to the center, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She gestured toward the first image, a candid shot of Trump at a charity gala, his arm draped around a young woman. It was nothing unusual at first glance, but Crockett's voice cut through the room like glass. This photograph was taken on October 15th, 1994, same day as the unexplained wire transfer you just saw. Same city, same hour. Trump's lawyer rose halfway from his seat. Objection, relevance. The judge held up a hand. She's establishing foundation. Proceed. Crockett nodded, flipping to the next slide. This time, a sworn affidavit appeared on the screen, signed by a former event coordinator. Her words, highlighted in yellow, spoke of an introduction, brief, discreet, and oddly hurried. The witness recalls, Crockett continued, that Mr. Trump excused himself from the gala twice that evening for extended periods, accompanied by the same young woman. This account has never been challenged in court. Trump leaned forward, his voice booming. You're dragging innocent people into your witch hunt. Disgraceful. Crockett turned to him, unshaken. This isn't a witch hunt, Mr. Trump. It's a breadcrumb trail you left yourself. The tension in the room thickened. Even the clicking of reporters' cameras slowed, as if everyone was holding their breath. From the gallery, a man in a gray suit scribbled a note and passed it discreetly down the row. Crockett caught the movement in her peripheral vision, filing it away like a card in a mental deck. The last image came into focus. A single page from a birth certificate, heavily redacted, but with just enough visible to raise the question. No one had dared to voice, until now. Asterisk. The projector's hum deepened as the lights dimmed, casting the courtroom into a shadowed arena. The birth certificate fragment lingered on the screen, that single tantalizing square of truth amid thick, black redaction lines. The judge's gaze stayed fixed on it, as if by staring long enough he might see through the censor bars. Jasmine Crockett moved closer to the evidence table, fingers resting lightly on a sealed envelope. She didn't touch it yet. Her voice was steady, but a note of gravity wrapped around every syllable. This, she began, is where speculation becomes science. The envelope sat there, plain and unmarked, but the air around it seemed to vibrate. In the gallery, someone cleared their throat too loudly, earning a sharp look from the bailiff. Crockett's eyes swept across the room before locking briefly with Trump's. You've called my work a witch hunt. You've called it fake. But the truth is simpler than politics, simpler than opinion. It's written in the language of blood. Trump leaned forward, elbows on the defense table, a thin smirk pulling at one corner of his mouth. DNA can say anything you want it to if you pay the right people. Crockett didn't flinch. Then let's put that claim to the test. She broke the seal on the envelope, sliding out a thin stack of lab reports. The paper caught the light, clinical black text on sterile white, the kind of document that speaks without emotion, yet leaves no room for doubt. These results, she said, were obtained from a court-approved independent laboratory. Chain of custodies certified and documented. She handed a copy to the judge, another to the court clerk, then held one page aloft for the projector's camera to capture. Numbers, percentages, identifiers. To the untrained eye, meaningless strings. But to the experts in the room, they sang one clear note. Trump's attorney shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is— Sit down, the judge said, not looking. Away from the report, Crockett stepped to the witness stand where a middle-aged man in a dark suit waited patiently. Please state your name and qualifications for the record. Dr. Alan Marcus, the man replied. Forensic geneticist. 22 years in the field. former director of the Mid-Atlantic DNA Analysis Unit, published author in Journal of Forensic Sciences. Crockett paced slowly, every step deliberate. Dr. Marcus, did you personally oversee the analysis of the samples submitted in this case? I did. And are these results accurate to a degree accepted by the scientific and legal communities? They are, yes. She paused, letting the quiet stretch until even the clicking of pens stopped. Can you tell the court the probability that Donald J. Trump is the biological father of the individual referenced in this report? Dr. Marquez glanced at the page, though it was clear he already knew the answer. The probability is 99.78%. The number dropped into the room like a lead weight. For a moment, there was no reaction, just the faint whir of the ceiling fans. Then, a ripple, gasps from the gallery, hurried whispers from reporters, the low thud of Trump's palm slamming against the table. That's garbage science. Trump barked, his voice echoing off the walls. Who even is this so-called expert? Another political hitman. The judge's gavel came down hard. Mr. Trump, you will remain silent or you will be removed. Crockett's voice cut clean through the chaos. The expert has no political affiliation with me, with you, or with anyone else in this room. His only loyalty is to the truth that your own DNA cannot deny. Trump's attorney leaned over to whisper something, but he swatted the man's arm away, muttering under his breath. Crockett caught only fragments. Set up, won't stand, will crush her. Turning back to Dr. Marquez, she asked, Doctor, would you say this level of probability leaves any reasonable doubt? None, he replied. This is as close to absolute certainty as forensic genetics allows. Crockett let the answer hang in the air, then walked back to the evidence table. From a separate file, she drew out photographs. A girl in her teens, standing in a school auditorium, smiling beside a science fair project. Another of her in a softball uniform, bat slung casually over one shoulder. These were taken from public social media accounts, publicly accessible. Crockett sighed. The young woman has never sought fame, never sought controversy. She has lived her life in the shadows, shadows created by the man who should have stood beside her. Trump's head snapped up. You don't know anything about her. Leave her out of this. I intend to, Crockett replied calmly, but I will not leave the truth out of this. The gallery stirred again, the human weight of the revelation settling in. This wasn't just legal warfare now, it was moral exposure. The narrative was no longer about politics or polling. It was about identity, acknowledgement, and the weight of a father's denial. Crockett gathered the lab reports and placed them neatly back into the envelope. Your Honor, I submit these documents as Exhibit C. They speak for themselves. The judge nodded slowly, still staring at the numbers as though they carried some unbearable gravity. Admitted. Dr. Marcus stepped down from the stand. As he passed Trump's table, the former president shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. The doctor didn't break stride in the dimmed light. Crockett stood tall, her shadow stretching across the polished floor toward the defense table. She knew the DNA was only the spine of the story. The flesh and blood were yet to come. But the room had shifted. The oxygen had changed. And in that new atmosphere, Trump's usual armor of bluster looked suddenly thin. Somewhere outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, whether from the streets or from the collapsing walls of his carefully guarded narrative. No one could quite tell. Asterisk, the courtroom's heavy silence felt almost unnatural after the blunt precision of the DNA testimony. For a moment, no one moved. Even the journalists seemed uncertain whether to keep writing or just watch. Then Jasmine Crockett stepped forward again, her posture a blend of resolve and quiet compassion. She spoke not to the judge this time, nor directly to Trump, but to the audience in the gallery, and, through the ever-hungry cameras, to the millions outside who would watch these moments replayed on every screen. Science, she began, tells us the what, but life tells us the who. Her hand drifted to a slim folder at the edge of her table. She lifted it slowly, as if even the act of touching it carried weight. Inside were not charts, nor bank statements, but photographs, letters, and transcripts of recorded interviews. This, she said softly, is who. On the projector, an image filled the screen. The same young woman from the softball photo in Chapter 4, this time captured mid-laugh, her hair wind-tossed, eyes alive with a warmth that seemed to light up the entire frame. This is not a political prop, Crockett said. This is a person who has lived 18 years, wondering why one half of her story has been treated like a shameful secret. Trump's eyes stayed locked on the table in front of him. His hands clasped together, knuckles whitening. Crockett continued, for years she was told not to ask questions, that it was complicated, that the man in the photographs on the news was just someone she looked a little like. She paused, but the mirror tells its own story. From the gallery, a faint murmur, not outrage this time, but something closer to sorrow. Crockett tapped a page in the folder. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to read from a statement provided by the young woman herself. She has chosen not to appear in person, for reasons that should be obvious. The judge glanced toward the defense. Objection? Trump's attorney hesitated. If the witness is not here to be cross-examined, it is not a witness statement, Crockett interjected. It is a personal letter. A letter not written for this courtroom, but for the man who has denied her existence. The court may decide whether it hears it, but he will hear it either way. The judge leaned back. Proceed. Crockett unfolded the letter, the paper trembling slightly in her hands, not from nerves, but from the weight of what it carried. She began to read. I don't know if you've ever thought about me. I've thought about you. I've wondered what it's like to walk into a room and have people stand because of your name. I've wondered what it's like to have a father you can point to and say, that's him. My friends post pictures of their dads on Father's Day. I've never posted yours. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. I learned early that your name could open doors, but it could also close them if the wrong people knew why I had it. I just wanted to know you. I'm not asking for anything. Just acknowledgement that I'm here, and that I didn't imagine the connection between us. Crockett lowered the page. The silence was heavier now, tinged with a collective discomfort. Trump sat motionless, but his jaw flexed in small, sharp movements. This letter, Crockett said, isn't about money. It's not about politics. It's about identity, the thing no one should have to prove with a lab test. Trump finally looked up. His voice was low but taut. You're exploiting a young woman for your own agenda. No, Crockett replied, meeting his gaze. I'm giving her the voice you took away. The judge's gavel rapped once. Not for order, but as if to mark the gravity of what had just been said. Crockett stepped toward the screen again, and a short clip began to play. It wasn't a press interview. It was grainy, handheld phone footage of the young woman speaking to a friend. Her words were simple, but uncheckable. I don't hate him. I just don't understand why I wasn't enough to be part of his story. The clip ended, the screen went dark, and for a moment it felt as though the courtroom itself exhaled. Crockett turned back to the bench. Your Honor, Exhibit D for the record. The identity of this young woman has been verified, and her statement authenticated. I submit it not as legal proof of paternity, we already have that, but as evidence of the human impact of concealment. The judge nodded, sliding the document into the case file dot in the back row. A journalist leaned toward her colleague and whispered, This is going to bury him more than the DNA did. Trump's attorney began to shuffle papers, whispering urgently in his client's ear. Trump didn't respond, his eyes fixed somewhere far past the walls of the courtroom, perhaps on a younger version of himself who had once made a choice that brought them to this day. Crockett closed the folder and set it aside. We have the facts. We have the science. And now we have the truth from the only person who should have been able to speak it first. She straightened, her voice gaining steel again. The question before us is not whether she is his daughter. The question is why the world had to hear it here under oath instead of from the man who should have claimed her proudly. The judges' eyes drifted to Trump. Mr. Trump, do you wish to respond? He hesitated, then shook his head. Not yet. The court recessed for 10 minutes, but no one in the room truly left. Some huddled in whispered conferences. Others typed furiously, their words already racing toward the public. In the corner, Crockett stood alone, arms crossed, her gaze steady on the table where the letter still lay. She knew the next phase would be louder, angrier. The defense would strike back. The temperature would rise. But she also knew that in those 1,000 quiet seconds, the country had just seen the man across from her in a way they never had before. And in politics, sometimes, that was the real verdict. Asterisk, the courtroom reconvened after the brief recess, but the atmosphere was different now. Gone was the brittle stillness of before. In its place, an undercurrent of something volatile, like dry air before a lightning strike. Reporters had returned to their seats with fresh batteries and sharper eyes. The gallery leaned forward, sensing that the fight was about to change tone. Donald Trump sat taller now, a subtle but deliberate adjustment. His jacket was unbuttoned, hands folded on the table in front of him, a posture calculated to project control, even if the earlier blows had landed. He glanced at his attorney, who gave a small nod. The judge motioned to proceed. Trump spoke first. "This is all political theater," he said, his voice filling the space. "A hit job. We're in the middle of one of the most important elections in history, and suddenly here comes this sideshow. Fake science, fake stories, fake outrage. They're not coming after me. They're coming after you, the American people, because I'm the only thing standing in their way." A murmur rose from his supporters in the gallery, quickly silenced by the bailiff. Jasmine Crockett's reply was measured, but her eyes were alight. "Mr. Trump, this is not about your campaign. It's about your character. And character is not partisan." Asterisk, Trump leaned back, smirking. "My character is winning. My character is building an economy, keeping America safe. That's what people care about, not whatever personal soap opera you're trying to sell." Crockett stepped toward the jury box. Though this wasn't a trial with jurors, the movement was symbolic. Patriotism without integrity is just branding, Mr. Trump. And your brand doesn't erase your obligations as a father, as a citizen, or as a man who has sworn an oath to the truth. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. "You think the people in this country care about some so-called daughter? They care about their jobs, their security, their freedom from people like you who want to control everything." Crockett's voice sharpened. "No one is controlling anything here except the facts. You've built your career on the idea that you alone define the truth, that if you say something loudly enough, often enough, it becomes reality. But reality isn't yours to manufacture. And the truth is, you've hidden someone who had the right to your acknowledgement from the day she was born." The judge cut in, his voice calm but firm. "Let's keep this focused." Trump gestured toward Crockett. "See, this is what they do. They turn a personal matter into a weapon because they can't beat me on policy. They can't beat me on results." Crockett's reply was immediate. "It's not a weapon if it's the truth. And it's not personal if it speaks to the kind of leadership this nation deserves." She paused, letting the silence hang just long enough to land her next words. "If you will not be honest in your private life, Why should the public trust you in your public one? For the first time, Trump didn't answer right away. His attorney whispered something into his ear, but his eyes never left Crockett. Lee. Tension between them felt almost physical, a taut wire stretching across the courtroom. From the corner of the room, a reporter muttered to another, "This isn't about the daughter anymore. This is about the soul of the office." Trump finally spoke, his tone lower now, but no less forceful. "You want to talk about integrity? Look at the corruption in your own party. Look at the lies you've told to push your agenda. Don't come in here and pretend you're some saint." Crockett didn't flinch. "I'm not claiming sainthood. I'm claiming responsibility, something you've spent your life dodging. The presidency is not a trophy, Mr. Trump. It's a trust. And you've treated it the way you've treated this young woman, as something that only matters when it serves you." The gallery stirred again, the bailiff shifting his weight toward the noise. Trump's hand came down hard on the table. "You're twisting everything. This is America, a country where a man has a right to his private life without political enemies digging through it like scavengers." Crockett's voice softened, but only slightly. "Yes, a man has that right. But a president has a higher one, to be transparent about matters that speak to his integrity and the trust of the people he serves. You can't ask the nation for loyalty and deny it to your own flesh and blood." The judge leaned forward. "Counselor, let's move toward your next point." Crockett nodded, taking a deliberate step back, but her gaze remained locked on Trump. "The ideological divide here is simple. You believe power is an end in itself. I believe power is a tool for service. You see the truth as negotiable. I see it as the foundation of democracy. That's why we're here." Trump shook his head slowly, his expression somewhere between disbelief and disdain. "You can dress it up however you want. At the end of the day, this is an ambush." Crockett gathered her papers and returned to her table, the faintest hint of a smile touching her lips. "No, Mr. Trump, this is an accounting. And whether you like it or not, the books are open." The judge's gavel came down lightly, signaling the close of the exchange for now. But the room felt no lighter. If anything, the air was denser, saturated with the awareness that the confrontation had shifted from evidence to philosophy, from proof to principle. As the next witness was called, camera zoomed in on Trump's face. His expression was composed, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something. Not fear, not yet, but the awareness that his usual weapons might not be enough here. And for the first time that day, even his staunchest supporters in the gallery weren't entirely sure what the next round would bring. The weight in the courtroom had shifted. It was no longer a contest of facts. It was a war over perception. The jury, though officially absent in this type of proceeding, was represented. In the eyes of the public, the cameras, the millions watching at home. Every blink, every exhale, every lean forward of a spectator was another silent verdict forming in real time. Trump's legal team huddled close, their whispers frantic, gesturing toward the table where Jasmine's exhibits sat neatly stacked. He kept his arms crossed now, chin tilted downward, his glare fixed on her like a predator denied its prey. But there was a tremor in his posture, not fear, but the sharp awareness that control was slipping. Judge Harmon's gavel tapped once. "We will proceed with direct examination. Representative Crockett, you may call your next witness." Her heels clicked once against the polished floor as she stood. "The prosecution calls Dr. Marlene Vasquez, chief geneticist at the National Forensic Institute." The side door opened, and a woman in a navy suit stepped in, her hair pulled back in a strict bun. She carried a thick binder, the kind that radiated authority. The oath was administered quickly, and she took her seat. Jasmine approached with deliberate calm. "Dr. Vasquez, I'd like you to tell the court, in plain language, what your team was asked to examine. The witness opened the binder. We were tasked with analyzing 2 DNA samples, one from a publicly available paternity test conducted in 2017 involving the minor in question, and the other from a hair sample recovered from President Trump's personal effects during an unrelated civil proceeding. Trump's jaw tightened. "Objection," his attorney snapped. "That so-called hair sample was obtained without—" "It was part of public record," Jasmine interjected smoothly. "Entered into evidence in the 2018 deposition of Daniels v. Trump Enterprises. Your Honor, the court may recall it was not sealed." Judge Harmon raised a hand. "Objection overruled. The witness may continue." Vasquez glanced at her notes. "We conducted a standard comparative analysis. The results indicated, with a probability exceeding 99.98%, that the 2 individuals share a direct paternal relationship." Gasps scattered through the gallery. One reporter's pen froze mid-scribble. The cameras leaned forward, as though hungry. Trump's knuckles went white against the table edge. "This is a witch hunt," he barked. "A disgrace, Mr. Trump," Harmon's voice cut in. Ironclad, "You will remain silent until recognized." Jasmine didn't even turn toward him. Her eyes stayed locked on the witness. "Dr. Vasquez, what does that probability mean? To the average person? It means, barring an identical twin scenario, the man who provided that hair sample is the biological father of the minor in question." The sentence landed like a strike of thunder. In the back row, an older woman covered her mouth, eyes wide. Across the aisle, one of Trump's aides scribbled frantically into a legal pad, passing it forward with the urgency of a battlefield runner. Trump's attorney tried again. "There are chain of custody issues, Your Honor." Jasmine pivoted toward him. "The chain of custody argument collapses when the source material was publicly admitted in prior proceedings and not contested at the time. Your team had 5 years to challenge its validity. You didn't." Her voice carried not just authority, but a moral certainty that hit the room like a rising tide. "This isn't about political vendettas. This is about the truth, documented and irrefutable." Dr. Vasquez closed her binder. "Our conclusion was peer-reviewed by 2 independent laboratories. Both confirmed our findings." The judge nodded. "A record will reflect the corroboration." For a moment, silence returned, but it was not a calm silence. It was a vacuum, one pulling the oxygen from Trump's defense. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting toward the cameras as though weighing his next move carefully. Jasmine turned to the bench. "Your Honor, we will now introduce corroborating testimony from individuals with first-hand knowledge of the financial arrangements made following the child's birth." The door at the side of the courtroom opened again, and a man in a crisp gray suit stepped in, carrying a worn leather briefcase. The crowd stirred, some recognizing him instantly. Stephen Clark, a former Trump Organization accountant who had gone public 2 years earlier with allegations of concealed payments. Clark approached the stand, his steps deliberate, eyes fixed forward. He was sworn in, then settled into the witness chair. "Mr. Clark," Jasmine began, "please describe your position at the Trump Organization in the year 2005. I was a senior financial controller, responsible for monitoring discretionary accounts and special projects. And in 2005, were you instructed to facilitate payments to an individual not listed as a formal vendor or contractor?" "Yes," Clark said, his voice steady. "The payments were directed to a private account under the name of a third-party custodian. When I cross-referenced the address, it matched the residence of the child's mother." Trump's attorney slammed a palm onto the table. "Objection! Hearsay!" "Not hearsay," Jasmine shot back. "These are documented transactions with receipts and ledger entries, which I am prepared to enter into evidence." Judge Harmon gestured. "Proceed." Clark's testimony unfolded like a careful dismantling of a facade. Monthly transfers, disguised under ambiguous expense codes, routed through layers designed to avoid internal audits. Jasmine's questions cut sharp but methodical each, one anchoring the financial trail to a timeline the DNA had already fortified. By the time Clark stepped down, the air in the courtroom had changed again. The murmurs were heavier now, tinged with something close to inevitability. Even the court reporter, who had been stone-faced all morning, glanced briefly at Jasmine. With something resembling quiet admiration, Trump sat rigid, lips pressed into a thin line, his fingers drumming the table in short, agitated bursts. But his eyes, usually quick to scan for an angle, were fixed on a point in the middle distance, as though he could already feel the closing walls. Jasmine gathered her papers, her tone measured but unyielding. Your Honor, the evidence presented today is not conjecture. It is a convergence of science, documentation, and first-hand testimony. The American people deserve answers. The judge's gaze swept over the courtroom before settling back on the defense table. We will reconvene after a brief recess. Counsel, be ready to address the admissibility of all exhibits at that time. The gavel struck once. Chairs scraped. Whispers ignited, and the tension, though momentarily paused, hung over the room like a storm cloud waiting to break. The air inside the courtroom felt like it had been vacuum sealed. Every intake of breath was deliberate, every movement amplified in the tense silence. Even the judge's gavel rested untouched on the bench, as though afraid to interrupt what was unfolding. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on the former president. The sunlight streaming in from the tall, narrow windows caught in her hair, a halo of defiance. In her hands rested another manila folder, its edges worn, corners frayed, the kind of document that had been carried, studied, and guarded for. Weeks, Mr. Trump, she began, her voice low but resonant. Earlier, you dismissed the DNA results as fabricated. Yet here, she lifted the folder and flipped it open. We have not one, but 3 separate independent labs that conducted matching tests. All show a 99.8% probability. Trump's jaw tightened. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably, one, whispering in his ear, but his gaze stayed fixed on Jasmine like a man staring down an adversary he could not predict. He scoffed, but there was a tremor in it. This is a political hit job. You're playing to the cameras, Crockett. That's all this is. Her lips curved, not in amusement, but in a slow, deliberate recognition of his tactic. You think these cameras are my audience? She gestured toward the gallery, where reporters' pens scratched furiously against notepads. The audience is every American who's been told the truth doesn't matter anymore. And they're watching you right now, wondering why a man who claims to stand for family values refuses to acknowledge his own blood. The words hit like a slow, crushing wave. Gasps rippled through the gallery. A woman in the third row, who had been silent since proceedings began, let out a choked sound and covered her mouth. The judge cleared his throat. Ms. Crockett, please keep your remarks within the scope of— This is within scope, Your Honor, she pressed on, her voice rising now. Because when you hide a child, you're not just concealing a personal truth. You're altering the public record, the trust between the leader of a nation and the people he governs. Trump's lawyer objected, but the judge's hand shot up. Overruled. Proceed. The former president shifted in his seat, straightening his tie, the movement sharp and defensive. I don't know what kind of fantasy you've built in your head, he snapped, but I can tell you right now, it's all lies. Pure lies. Jasmine took a step closer to the witness stand, closing the physical space between them. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she lowered it, forcing the room to lean in. Then tell me, Mr. Trump, why were there direct payments? Monthly, to the child's mother, disguised as consulting fees in your company ledgers? Why does the timing of those payments match the dates of the child's schooling and medical expenses? And why, she held up a glossy photo, is there a picture of you holding her at Mar-a-Lago when she was barely a year old? Photograph seemed to thud through the air as she placed it on the evidence table. It wasn't a staged photo op. It was intimate, almost unguarded. Trump cradled a baby in his arms, smiling down at her. The resemblance was undeniable. His hands gripped the sides of his chair until his knuckles whitened. That's a friend's child, he said quickly, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. 3 separate witnesses, Jasmine replied, have sworn under oath that she is not. The judge leaned forward slightly, brows knitting. Mr. Trump, you will have an opportunity to address these points under cross-examination. From the gallery, a man's voice cut through, unplanned and loud. We deserve to know the truth. Security moved quickly, but the sentiment had already broken the courtroom's facade of controlled procedure. Murmurs swelled, the tension spilling over like water breaching a dam. Jasmine turned back to Trump, her eyes never wavering. You've built an empire on controlling the narrative. But today, you don't control this one. The truth is here. It's documented, and no amount of shouting will make it disappear. For the first time, he didn't answer immediately. His lips parted, then pressed shut again. The cameras caught everything, the brief flicker of uncertainty, the weight of the silence that followed. Jasmine stepped back toward her table, the moment hanging heavy in the air. Your Honor, she said finally, I have no further questions for the witness at this time. The judge nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on Trump, as if trying to read the man's internal calculus dot as the gavel struck to signal a recess. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras flashing, voices calling out over one another. Trump rose. Abruptly, his chair scraping the floor, and stormed toward the side door, his lawyer at his heels. Jasmine remained seated, the dossier still open in front of her. She didn't need to follow him, not yet. The tide was shifting, and she knew it. The evidence had been planted like seeds in the minds of everyone present, and no outburst could unroot it now. Outside the courtroom, protesters and supporters, alike pressed against the barricades, their chants echoing against the marble facade. Inside, the tension clung to the air like static electricity, promising that the next round would be even more explosive. And somewhere, beyond the reach of the court's walls, a young woman, the alleged daughter, might have been watching, seeing the truth of her own life play out under the scrutiny of the nation. Asterisk, the courtroom was not the same room it had been when the day began. What once carried a veneer of control now vibrated with the restless hum of a nation's attention. Phones buzzed beneath the gallery benches. Reporters frantically tapped out fragments of headlines and the faint, relentless click of camera. Shudders became the heartbeat of the moment. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward at the witness table, her fingers laced together, the weight of her words still lingering in the stale air. Across from her, Trump sat motionless, but the stillness was deceptive, like a pressure cooker moments before it blows. His right hand twitched against the polished oak of the table, and his jaw worked as if grinding down unspoken threats. Your Honor, Crockett began again, voice low but with a steel edge. We have heard testimony from witnesses who have no political allegiance, who came forward because the truth matters. We have receipts, sworn statements, and a paper trail that leads here. She tapped the thick binder before her. But what we haven't yet addressed is motive. A ripple of curiosity spread through the gallery. Even the court stenographer, who had trained herself into mechanical detachment, paused for the briefest of moments before her fingers resumed their rhythm. Trump finally spoke, leaning toward the microphone with the force of a man determined to bulldoze the conversation. This is garbage, he snapped, his voice coated in contempt. A made-up smear from a desperate congresswoman, trying to make a name for herself. Nobody believes. This nobody. Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. That's where you're wrong. The American people believe what they can see. And what they're seeing today is you refusing to answer a simple question. Why hide her? Trump's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth, but the judge's gavel cracked down like thunder. Mr. Trump, the judge said, voice ringing. Through the chamber, you will answer questions put to you. You are not here to campaign. You are here under oath. The oath, those two words hung in the air, like a trapdoor ready to swing. Woman in the front row of the gallery shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between Crockett and Trump. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Crockett caught it. She knew that looked someone carrying a secret that had become too heavy to hold. Your Honor, Crockett said, standing, I request permission to recall Miss Delaney as a witness. Trump's head jerked up. Objection. This is a circus. Overruled. The judge said without hesitation. The bailiff opened the side door, and in walked Rebecca Delaney, the former Trump Organization accountant. She moved like someone walking through a storm air pulled back, shoulders squared, but her hands clenched tight around a slim folder. She took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but Crockett's questioning drew her steady. Miss Delaney, Jasmine began, did you handle financial disbursements from the Trump Organization's private accounts? Yes. Did you process recurring transfers to an account under the name Marissa Hawley? Delaney's throat worked, and she glanced briefly at Trump before answering. Yes, every month for over 16 years. A low gasp spread across the gallery like a breeze through dry leaves. Crockett stepped closer. And who authorized those payments? Delaney's eyes dropped to the folder in her lap. She opened it slowly, revealing photocopies of checks bearing Trump's unmistakable signature. He did. For a moment, it seemed like the air in the room had thickened, each breath harder to draw. Trump shifted back in his seat, muttering something under his breath that the microphones didn't quite catch. Crockett pressed on, her voice now soft enough to pull the room inward. Miss Delaney, why did you keep this information? Delaney looked up, her voice cracking under the weight of years. Because I was afraid. But the truth, she glanced toward Trump, her chin trembling, the truth doesn't go away just because you bury it under money and threats. Trump slammed a hand down on the table. Lies. She's lying to save herself. The gavel struck again. Mr. Trump, one more outburst and I will have you removed from these proceedings, the judge warned. Crockett didn't move her eyes from Delaney. Miss Delaney, do you know who Marissa Hawley is to Mr. Trump? The room seemed to shrink around the question. Delaney's eyes glistened. She's his daughter. Gasps erupted from every corner of the gallery. A photographer's flash exploded like lightning. Trump shot to his feet, his chair skidding backward with a screech. That is not true. He roared, voice shaking with unrestrained fury. The damage was done. The words hung there, immovable, echoing in every mind present. Crockett stepped back, letting the revelation breathe, letting it settle in the way only an undeniable truth can dot. And in that moment, as the judge's gavel fought to restore order, the tide in the courtroom shifted. The questions had changed. This was no longer about proving an allegation. It was about what came next. Asterisk, the gavel struck once, twice, echoing like cannon fire through the marble hall. The packed courtroom seemed to hold its breath, as if the very walls were waiting for the next word. Judge Thompson's eyes scanned the room, his voice low yet resonant. We will conclude with closing remarks. Representative Crockett, your final statement. Jasmine rose slowly, every movement deliberate. Her voice carried none of the earlier fire. Instead, it bore the weight of inevitability. This case was never about humiliating a man, she began, glancing briefly toward Trump. It is about revealing the truth to the American people. Truth about power. Truth about responsibility. Truth about what is owed, not just to one child, but to a nation. She stepped closer to the bench, her heels clicking against the stone floor like a metronome counting down to something irreversible. No one, she said, is above accountability. Not even a president. Especially not a president. Trump's arms were crossed so tightly, his knuckles turned white. His legal team whispered frantically, but he kept his eyes fixed on the floor. Jasmine continued. Today, we have placed before this court, and before the public, a chain of evidence that speaks for itself. We have not asked for pity, nor for revenge, only for recognition. Her gaze swept the gallery, pausing where she knew the cameras would catch it. Recognition that the truth matters. The judge nodded slightly, and her words seemed to hang in the air. For a moment, the silence was total, until the scrape of Trump's chair cut through it. He stood abruptly, eyes blazing. This is a witch hunt, he barked, his voice ricocheting off the marble. You all know it. But the eruption fell flat. The murmurs in the gallery weren't sympathy. They were disbelief. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch of his jaw, every bead of sweat along his temple. The judge's gavel slammed down. Mr. Trump, you will control yourself. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she turned toward him, her voice quiet but piercing enough to reach the furthest bench. Control has always been your problem. You've controlled narratives, controlled people, controlled what the public could see. But control over the truth? That was never yours to keep. The words landed like a final blow. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps, their microphones bristling like a forest of steel stems. Inside, the judge announced the next hearing date, but the formalities felt like background noise. The real verdict had already been rendered in the court of public opinion. Trump left first, moving quickly, flanked by his attorneys, but the photographers outmaneuvered them. Flashes exploded in rapid succession, illuminating his scowl from every angle. Behind him, Jasmine emerged into the sunlight, her chin high. She didn't smile. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a step towards something larger. As she descended the steps, a reporter shouted, Congresswoman, do you think this will change anything? She paused, looking past the crowd toward the horizon. Change starts with telling the truth, she said simply. And today, the truth got out. The clip went viral before she reached her car. On cable news, anchors replayed the moment. Over and over, Trump's face at the revelation, the dossier hitting the table. Jasmine's final line on the courthouse steps. At home, millions debated. Some called it a political assassination. Others saw it as long overdue accountability. But for those who had lived their lives in the shadow of unspoken truths, the moment felt like a window thrown open after years of stale air. That night, as Jasmine sat in her quiet kitchen, her phone buzzed with messages from strangers. People thanking her, sharing their own stories of concealed paternity, of hidden lives. She read each one slowly, letting their words settle. For Trump, the night brought a different flood. His team scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing statements, scheduling interviews, attempting to reframe the narrative. But every time he spoke, the original footage played alongside his words, unblinking, undeniable. The courtroom battle was not over. More hearings would come, more witnesses, more documents. But something fundamental had shifted. Jasmine knew it. Trump knew it. And the country, for better or worse, could never unknow it. In the dim light of her kitchen, she whispered to herself, almost as if sealing a vow, the truth doesn't just survive, it wins.